Welcome to the Accidental Experts podcast. I'm your host, Bryce Hamilton. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a child and family therapist. I have been in practice for over 15 years, and I'm also a mom of 4. So I know the challenges both professionally and personally. I'm so glad that you're here today to grow your parenting toolbox. Please come as you are and be ready to learn. My goal is to make you the accidental expert so that you can raise healthy humans. Hi guys, welcome back. Welcome to part 2 of eating disorders with Abby Brown. We're going to be talking a little bit more in depth today about eating disorders and how to help support our people that are going through that. We had such a great conversation last time. This time we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about eating disorders and how to help people if they've identified that they have somebody in their life that does have an eating disorder. So we're glad to have you with us.
Yeah, awesome. Ready to answer the questions.
Yeah, let's do this. Okay, so if we identify that our child or teen is struggling with eating, how
Mhm.
can we support them? Like, what should parents do in those situations?
Yeah, so if you've noticed, usually there's going to be some types of red flags, usually starting with like their pediatrician or primary care physician, where you see a significant shift in weight from like their last visit, something that's a little bit outside of the norm. So more often than not, at that point, your primary care physician is probably going to refer you to like specialized care. And there's different levels of care available. So I'll kind of talk a little bit about the hierarchy of higher level of treatment. So at the very top is going to be residential treatment. And this is going to be for the like really intense cases where, this is 24/7. You are, staying in a residential facility where all meals are monitored. There's going to be, a dietitian involved, individual therapy, group therapy, oftentimes family therapy. And there's going to be lots of support, well, a lot more support there because like I said, it's 24/7 care. Now, what I've seen in my experience is residential care is usually needed for someone that is like significantly underweight and where we don't have a lot of time before like permanent damage is done to their body. So it's also important to consider like how open your child is to care. And again, if they're in a situation where they're extremely underweight and we don't have a lot of time to make changes on our own, residential care is going to be what you want to do. But again, it's going to depend on the child. So then a step down from residential care would look like a PHP program, which is a partial hospitalization program where they're maybe spending majority of the day like at the hospital doing monitored meals, still doing group therapy, individual therapy, meetings with a dietitian. But the difference is they might be like sleeping in their own bed, right? Where like they might be at a treatment facility from like, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. So majority of the day is spent there, but still going home at the end of the day. A step down from PHP would be IOP, Intensive Outpatient Program. And this is usually about like 9 hours a week of treatment where, they're going into a treatment facility from, I don't know, a few hours. Like an example would be like from like 3 to 6 on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, where they're doing some type of group therapy work more often than not. There's usually a supported meal involved, and maybe other things like, a yoga class or, skills training, which is all going to be group work. So that's about like 9 hours a week. And then the last step down from that would just be outpatient treatment. And that's going to be where, you're seeing a therapist once a week. You're maybe seeing a dietitian once a week. So maybe 2, maybe 3 hours of treatment a week if you're including which most treatment, at least the way I do treatment with my clients, is there is absolutely a dietitian involved. So it's like myself, a dietitian, and their pediatrician or primary care physician to do, medical evaluations as needed to make sure their weight is steady or their weight is going up if that's what's needed. And then from outpatient, ideally would be stepping down from treatment altogether. Or maybe we get to a place where, okay, you're coming in and checking in with me once a month. And then we slowly try to phase out of treatment.
So, talk to me about, you've mentioned nutritionists several times. What role do
Mhm.
they play in this process of helping people with eating disorders?
Yeah, a dietitian is a pivotal part in treatment because a dietitian is going to be the one that's coming up with your meal plan and usually the one that's getting your growth charts from your primary care physician or pediatrician and looking at like, okay, what is a healthy weight for this person to be? Where are we starting? You know, where do we need to go? And making a meal plan according to meeting those goals. And there's so much education to be done around food for the individual is, I mean, things as simple as like how does our body digest food? How does our bodies actually work? Why do we need to incorporate fats, carbs, proteins, you know, starches, you know, sugar? Why are those things important for our bodies to function at the optimum level? That's where a registered dietitian's expertise is going to come into play. Whereas like from a therapist perspective, my perspective, we're really focusing on coping. We're focusing on um, honing in on skills to, you know, handle discomfort as we're trying to incorporate maybe more food or just a change in diet as part of your treatment plan. And really trying to understand and look at the why for these things, like what types of, how is the current eating patterns serving you? And can we find, you know, another way to, you know, satisfy that need? Whereas again, the dietitian's role is going to be really focused on meal plan and weight restoration if necessary.
Yeah. So are you guys also, when you're doing work with your clients, are you also working on like figuring out if there was a trauma, like if there's something else contributing to that alongside, you know, the coping and navigating the things in the moment? Are we also looking at the past too?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's recovery from an eating disorder is interesting. Whereas a lot of times people, if you go in for like depression, anxiety, or something else, you're wanting to understand and know the why, like right off the bat. Like, how did we get here? Why are we
Mhm.
here? Whereas with eating disorder recovery, sometimes it can be like the opposite. If like, so if I have a client come in that I know is like significantly underweight, right? Like a pediatrician or their primary care physician referred them to me. I'm making sure that we're getting a dietitian on board. I'm making sure that they are healthy enough to be treated on an outpatient basis. If not, I'll refer to a higher level of care. Um, but if we know that weight restoration is needed, that's usually our first focus. We
Mhm.
might not get into the why until a little bit later because we don't want to waste any more time, right?
Yeah.
Especially if they're starting to cross a line over, ooh, this might do some permanent damage. We want weight restoration to be number one, and we'll get to the why maybe second or third.
Yeah.
Now, if they're at a healthy weight or they're at like a safe weight to be treated on an outpatient basis, yeah, we're absolutely diving into kind of how did we get here? When did things start? Do you remember a time where this wasn't the case? And trying to look at like what changed? What changed in the way you were looking at yourself? What changed in the way you were looking at the world around you? And that way, again, we can understand what purpose the disordered eating thoughts or disordered eating behaviors serve in their life, and try to chip away at that and figure out different ways for them to get those needs met without it affecting their physical health.
Love that. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's important to know that like sometimes an eating disorder can be an emergency, right? Where
Yeah,
we do
absolutely.
absolutely have to do something right now. And
Mhm.
so again, best to intervene early, like you said before. So you mentioned recovering from an eating disorder. Is that possible? And what does that look like?
Yeah, recovery is absolutely possible. I've seen it happen. I've been so I mean lucky enough to like walk with people on that journey and to see a person grow in that way is amazing. And I will always use my clients that have made it to recovery or into a full recovery as examples like, hey, I know this is possible because I've seen people who are in your shoes right now do it, right? Like I
Mhm.
know it's possible and it takes a lot of hard work. I always tell my clients and parents that like recovering from an eating disorder is probably one of the hardest things they will ever do. Recovery from an eating disorder is different than recovering from things like substance use because we need food to live, right? And that's no negativity towards recovery from a substance use disorder. That is hard in its own right for sure, not taking anything away from that, but there are ways to maybe avoid like going into a bar or being in a place where you know the people that you're with are going to be tempting, right?
Mhm.
So, I mean, recovery from an eating disorder, we can't avoid it, right? We need food to live. So the recovery process can be really long. And I mean, some people will say, depending on who you ask, some people might look at it as like, yeah, I'm in recovery for the rest of my life. And some people might be able to get to a healthy point and really close the door on that the version of themselves that had an eating disorder and move on with their life. It totally depends on the individual. But that's something I really like to focus on in my work with clients is really looking at bigger picture of, what do we need to do? What areas of yourself do we need to grow in? So that way you can reacclimate to like quote unquote like normal society where you can go out to dinner with friends or cook for yourself or cook for your family or eat with your family without your thoughts being solely around what you're eating and what you look like and what other people might be thinking about you. And I've seen that be possible where people get to a point where they can walk into a restaurant, or I'm sure we've all been in places where you walk in and you look at the menu up on the wall and there's, how many calories is in each meal. That, for someone that's in the beginning stages of recovery might be very triggering. So, but that's not something we necessarily have control of. We can't control the fact that menus put the calories next to the food items. But what I really like to work on with my clients is pulling away from placing so much meaning on those things, placing meaning on, the calories on the back of a food item, the number on the scale, right? Because those things are part of life. Those things are always going to be there. But what we can have a say in is how we interpret that and what type of meaning and label we're placing on those things.
Yeah, that's important. Okay, so so now that we've established we can recover, right?
Mhm.
Obviously, it can be a lifelong journey, or for some people, like you said, it can be something where they're able to navigate through. How do
Yeah.
we support people that are in recovery? What can we do as parents, but also just people in society?
Yeah, I think open communication is obviously going to be the number one thing. For someone that is in recovery, at least when I work with my clients that are in the thick of an eating disorder or on their road to recovery, is figuring out how to communicate their needs to the people around them is so important. Now, from a family's perspective, and I know this from working with parents, I always get kind of this pushback of like, I don't want to feel like I have to walk on eggshells around my child, or even like the child, my client, feeling like I don't want to feel like I have to walk on eggshells around my parents. That's never the goal, right? It's probably going to feel like that for a little bit because we kind of are walking on eggshells a little bit as my client is like honing in on skills to cope with maybe certain comments from somebody or someone saying something that might be triggering to them, but we know that that person didn't intend for it to be that way. Maybe that person didn't know my client is in the middle of recovering from an eating disorder. So figuring out how to cope in those moments is a super important part of recovery, and that happens over time. So there might be a little while where, yeah, mom and dad feel like they have to walk on eggshells around their child, but that's not forever. And again, encouraging and trying to empower my clients to advocate for themselves in that moment of, saying like, hey, I know you didn't mean it this way, but when you said that, I feel like this and this, and I'm just not there yet to hear that, right? Or I'm just not there yet for us to talk about how much calories are in something. But the goal would be that, yeah, people can have those conversations around me and I'm not going to be triggered by it. So when it comes to supporting someone who's recovering from an eating disorder, I always think it's helpful to ask what they need, right? But also to treat them completely normally, right? And it doesn't have to be something where it's like, oh, I don't want to eat this around you, or I don't want to say or do this around you. Treating them as normal is going to be really helpful. Like, yeah, just going out to eat with your friend or going out to eat with your parents as normal is really good, like exposure therapy, for lack of a better way to put it, of even though I know I'm really struggling right now, I can still sit down and eat and have a meal with my parents, or I can still sit down and eat and have a meal with my friends and just feel like I'm everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Just because you are. And so kind of putting yourselves in situations where you're engaging in quote unquote like normal behaviors is going to be the most helpful. And one of the other key things I tell my parents is, you don't necessarily need to watch what you say or do so carefully, but maybe kind of checking in with, okay, if my child didn't have an eating disorder, would I say this? Right? Like I'll use the example of parents, and I've heard this feedback from clients too. I know parents always try to be super helpful. Like if my client finishes a meal and mom or dad saying like, good job on finishing your plate.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that can almost be triggering because that's not normal. And that's when I kind of pose the question to mom and dad is, if your child did not struggle with what they were struggling with, would you tell them good job on finishing their meal? Probably not. So just kind of, still coming at it from a point of, I'm going to treat them normally and being open to listening to feedback they have for you, right? Without jumping to, I don't want to walk on eggshells, or I want to feel like I can say whatever around you.
Mm-hmm.
That will always be the goal. Maybe they're just not there yet.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think being curious too, like
Mhm.
if you do something that that somebody suggested to you, so whether it be your child or their therapist or the nutritionist, to say,
Mhm.
how did that feel for you? Was that okay? And maybe it's not all the time, but just being like, how do you feel like I'm doing? Is there any feedback you have? And I think as
Yeah.
a parent, it's so hard sometimes to take feedback, but we also want to have our kids feel good. And so it's balancing that part. And maybe it's also saying like, you know, that would be really hard for me to say. Could I say it like this? Or like giving other things, or like, honoring what is like the really big deal for them. Like,
Yeah.
don't order this thing. And it's like, okay, well, we won't order it for you, but we could eat it still, right? Like, or doing those kind of things where it's like making adjustments. Is that reasonable?
Yeah, I always think flexibility is a huge part of like supporting someone in recovery. It's not black and white. Recovery is very gray. So again, like you said, even as parents, being open to feedback is super important without you taking it personally. And same goes for the client as well, right? It's going to feel like things are really intense for a while, especially when you're first starting out on your recovery journey, but things do get better. It just takes time. So if it feels like for months, we're walking on eggshells around each other, or things just like don't seem to be clicking, one, talk with your child's like treatment team about that too, of like where you're struggling. I like to work really closely with parents because when we think about it, um, from like a bigger picture, I see your kid for 1 hour a week, right? Maybe 2 hours a week if we're doing 2 sessions. Mom and dad are the ones, or your family is the ones spending the most time with them. So in an odd way, mom and dad a little bit become treatment providers, right? They're going to be the ones monitoring the meals. They're the ones doing the grocery shopping. They're the ones seeing their child day to day. So working really closely with your child's treatment team is going to be super important. And that's something I like to tell parents from the beginning, like, hey, we need you guys. We need your support. We need you to show up, and I need you to model how important this is for your kid.
Yeah, that's such great advice. Thank you. Okay, so let's talk about okay, what would you want to say, I guess, to a teen or kid that is struggling or has disordered thought around food?
Yeah. Gosh, so many things. I would want to tell them that who they are as a person is not defined by their eating habits or the type of body they are in. I also want to make sure that they know having a healthy or like quote unquote normal relationship with food is possible. And if you're someone that's struggling right now, help is out there. It is possible to achieve food freedom. That's what I hear a lot of my clients tell me when they first come in and we're talking about goals for therapy is food freedom. I just want to feel free, because sometimes an eating disorder can feel like, gosh, you're in handcuffs, like to your own mind or to this own voice in your head that's telling you to do certain things or to look a certain way. Food freedom is always the goal. So I want people to know that that is possible. It's hard work and it's a long journey, but it is possible because I have yet to meet anyone that wants to live that way for the rest of their life.
Yeah,
Um, so again, if there's anything you take away from this, that food freedom is possible for you.
love that. Okay, and then finally, parents, what do you want them to take away from this
Yeah.
conversation?
I think I would want parents to just have a better understanding of why helping their child cultivate a healthy relationship with food is so important. Um, food, meals, I mean, life is there's so much more to life than the food and the snacks, and food is something that we need to live, and it's a huge part of our society and culture. Food is where we connect with other people, and understanding how our eating habits and our relationship with food plays a role in our social connections with others, but also again, how that impacts someone as an individual, I think is so important. I would want them to know that it just goes so far beyond making sure your body is healthy. It's something that impacts, like I said, social relationships, feeling included into things, being able to make conversation. Like I said, we're looking at bigger picture, being able to go out to dinner with a group of friends and not feel excluded from the group because I need to stay back because, eating at a restaurant is not something I can do right now. Going on dates at whatever point, being able to cook for themselves when they do become more independent. It's more than just the food. It's if there's anything that I could in one small way make sure or want parents to know is that it's not about the food. It's about this individual and how it's going to impact their life beyond just meals and snacks.
Yeah. I mean, because food is such an important thing, but it
Mhm.
integrates itself into every aspect of our life. Like
Yeah.
even sending my kids into elementary school, they're like, send snacks, right? Like
Yep.
eating in the lunchroom, that's a big deal, right? Like there's so
Yeah.
many parts of socialization that happen around food and fun,
Yeah.
right? So many
Yes.
fun things like birthday parties and holidays and, feeling like you can't engage in those things
Right.
has to be really hard.
Yeah, yeah, it goes so much deeper than just being able to eat in front of people, right? Like, I always like to kind of use the example of, yeah, let's say I do go to, a family dinner, but I choose not to order anything off the menu, but everyone else does. I've already kind of excluded myself from the group, right? And they're maybe engaging in conversation about like, oh, try this is be good. Oh, would you want to have a bite of this? It's so good. I'm not able to engage in that.
Mhm.
Right? Because of, other things I have going on. So again, how it impacts our ability to connect with others is so huge in just becoming a like well-rounded individual.
Yeah. Thank you so much again for your time today. This conversation has been fantastic. I
Yeah, it
know
was
that will
awesome.
help a lot of people.
Okay, good. Thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks again, Abby. It was a privilege to have you back for the second time. All the information was really helpful and helping us to just be more thoughtful about how to support our people, having a conversation with kindness and compassion and coming at it with curiosity. I love this idea. With that, I will say thank you so much for your time today. Please like and subscribe to our show, rate us, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. And also keep the emails coming with topic suggestions to accidentalexperts@gmail.com. Have a fantastic day. Some words from our legal team.
The information presented in this podcast is not intended or implied to be a substitute for appropriate professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All content, including text, graphics, images, and information contained on or available through this podcast, is for general information purposes only. This podcast makes no representations and assumes no responsibility for the accuracy or information on or available through this podcast, and such information is subject to change without notice. You are encouraged to confirm any information obtained through this program with other sources and review all information regarding any condition or treatment with the appropriate professionals.
What we're saying is, yes, I am a real therapist, but I'm not your therapist.